Elena walked slowly into the airport terminal with a calm smile on her face. She was dressed simply, wearing a plain cotton dress and a small scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Her shoes were clean but not expensive, and she carried only one small handbag that looked almost too ordinary for someone traveling on an international flight. People rushing through the terminal barely noticed her. They were busy pulling heavy suitcases, talking on phones, and running toward their gates. Elena moved differently, quietly, without hurry, as if she had all the time in the world. When she reached the check-in counter, she waited patiently in line. A businessman ahead of her placed his glossy suitcase on the scale, showing off his gold watch as he handed over his passport. The staff greeted him warmly, smiling as they handed him his boarding pass for first class. Elena noticed but said nothing. She only shifted her weight slightly, holding her handbag close. When it was finally her turn, she stepped forward and placed her ID and ticket on the counter. Her voice was soft and polite when she said, "I am booked in first class." The young woman behind the counter looked up at her with quick eyes. She scanned Elena from head to toe, noticing her plain clothes and simple handbag. For a moment, the staff member thought Elena must have made a mistake. She checked the computer again and saw the booking details clearly displayed. It did say first class. But instead of trusting the system, she let her own judgment take over. She forced a smile and said, "Madam, are you sure this is correct? First class is, well, it's quite an exclusive section. Maybe you meant economy." Elena answered kindly, "No, I believe it is correct. The ticket was booked in first class." Her voice carried no anger, only certainty. But the staff member's doubt grew. She glanced toward her colleague at the next counter, and they exchanged looks. Both of them seemed amused, as if a mistake had been made by the computer system. "I am sorry," the woman said with a dismissive tone, "but there seems to be some confusion. You may sit in economy instead. It is a very comfortable seat, I assure you." The words felt sharp, though they were spoken with a smile. Elena did not argue. She simply took back the boarding pass, which now displayed economy class. Her eyes showed no anger, no frustration, only a quiet acceptance. She thanked the staff member softly and stepped aside. Behind her, two young men who had been waiting in line began to whisper and chuckle. One said, "Did you see that? She thought she could get into first class. Look at her handbag, it probably cost less than my tie." The other laughed in agreement. Elena heard their voices but walked on with dignity, as if their words did not reach her heart. Nearby, a mother with two children gave Elena a sympathetic look. She had noticed how politely Elena had spoken and how rudely she had been dismissed. She wanted to say something but remained silent, fearing the staff might turn their coldness on her as well. The atmosphere carried both laughter from those who mocked Elena and silence from those who pitied her. But Elena continued walking with steady steps, her scarf lightly brushing her shoulders. At the boarding gate, Elena showed her pass to the flight attendant. The attendant looked at her quickly, then directed her toward the long aisle leading to economy. As Elena walked down the jet bridge, she passed posters on the wall advertising the airline's luxury first-class cabin. The posters showed wide leather seats, gourmet meals, and smiling passengers sipping sparkling drinks. She glanced at them but did not stop. She had seen them many times before, yet today there was something almost humorous about being denied entry into that very world she owned. Stepping onto the plane, Elena's eyes moved gently over the first-class cabin. Spacious seats stretched out like private rooms, glowing softly under golden lights. A man in a dark suit was already reclining comfortably, reading a financial magazine. A lady in a designer dress was taking selfies on her phone. The attendants in first class bowed respectfully to them, offering welcome drinks on silver trays. None of them paid attention to Elena as she walked past. One attendant gave her a quick dismissive glance, the kind of glance reserved for people who didn't belong. Elena continued walking until she reached the economy cabin. Here, the seats were narrow, close together, filled with passengers struggling to place their bags in the overhead bins. Children cried softly, and a man argued with his neighbor about the armrest. The air was warm and crowded. Elena found her seat number and quietly slid into her place by the window. She placed her handbag on her lap, folded her scarf neatly, and rested her hands. She appeared calm, though she had just been insulted by the very staff who should have honored her ticket. Beside her sat an elderly woman with trembling hands. She was trying to lift her heavy bag into the overhead compartment, but her arms shook, and the bag began to slip. Elena quickly stood up, steadying the bag and lifting it into place with surprising strength for her small frame. "Thank you, dear," the old woman whispered gratefully, her eyes full of relief. Elena smiled warmly and replied, "It's no trouble at all." She then helped the woman adjust her seat belt, making sure she was comfortable before sitting down again. Meanwhile, in first class, laughter filled the cabin as passengers shared stories of their businesses and vacations. The attendants walked back and forth, offering menus and drinks, their smiles wide and practiced. One of them, the same woman who had redirected Elena at the counter, whispered to a colleague, "Imagine if she had actually sat here. It would have been so strange. She doesn't belong in this world." Her colleague chuckled, agreeing without hesitation. They did not know their words would soon return to them with heavy weight. Back in economy, Elena leaned her head gently against the window. Outside, she could see the runway stretching far into the distance. Planes roared as they prepared for takeoff, lights blinking against the evening sky. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply. She thought about how people often judged by clothes, by handbags, by shoes, and by appearances, forgetting that true worth was hidden deeper, invisible to quick eyes. She knew her place in the world was far above what they could see, yet she never let pride or anger control her. Instead, she allowed silence to be her shield. As the plane doors closed and the engines began to rumble, Elena adjusted her seat belt. The elderly woman beside her smiled weakly, grateful for her earlier help. Elena gave a reassuring nod. Around her, passengers shifted in their seats, some preparing to sleep, others adjusting their headphones. No one suspected that the quiet, simple woman by the window was the very heart of the airline itself. The airplane rose into the sky, leaving the city lights shrinking below like a cluster of glowing stars. The engines roared for a while, then settled into a steady hum that filled the cabin with a constant vibration. In first class, the passengers were already enjoying drinks served in shining glasses. Their wide seats reclined into beds, and soft music floated in the background. The staff moved like dancers, offering menus, and smiling politely. The atmosphere was one of luxury and privilege. Far behind, in economy, the story was very different. The seats were tighter, the air warmer, and the crowd restless. Children tugged at their mothers' arms, some crying softly from the pressure in their ears. A man across the aisle argued with a young boy who had accidentally kicked his seat. The boy's mother apologized again and again, but the man only shook his head angrily. Elena sat calmly near the window, her eyes focused on the clouds outside. The sky was glowing with the last shades of sunset, fading into the deep blue of evening. Beside her, the elderly woman she had helped earlier leaned back with a tired smile. Her hands trembled slightly, and she whispered, "You're such a kind soul, my dear. Not many people stop to help strangers these days." Elena smiled warmly and answered, "Kindness costs nothing, but it gives so much." Her words were simple, but they carried a truth that comforted the old woman. She closed her eyes and rested, while Elena gently tucked the blanket around her shoulders. A flight attendant passed by, glancing quickly at Elena and her neighbor. The attendant gave only a brief nod, more out of duty than care. Then she hurried toward first class, where passengers were already demanding special services. Elena noticed the difference. She saw how the staff bowed their heads politely to those in luxury, while moving briskly and impatiently through the economy cabin. She didn't complain. She only watched quietly, her thoughts deep. She had designed this airline to serve every passenger equally, but now she saw with her own eyes how training had failed. It was a lesson she was already storing in her heart. The meal service began soon. Attendants moved through the aisles with trays of packaged food. Elena received hers without complaint. She opened the small box and ate slowly, savoring each bite though the food was modest. In first class, passengers dined on steaming plates of carefully cooked dishes, their laughter rising with every sip of wine. The staff hovered around them, refilling glasses before they were half empty. Some of the first-class passengers stretched their legs proudly, glancing toward the curtain that separated them from the rest of the plane, as if they wanted to remind themselves of their special place. Elena finished her meal and gently helped the old woman open her packet of food. The woman struggled with the plastic wrap, her hands too weak to tear it. Elena did it quietly, without drawing attention. The woman thanked her again, and Elena smiled softly. Around her, passengers talked in low voices. Some complained about the lack of legroom, others about the dry food, and a few already leaned back, trying to sleep through the long journey. Elena, however, remained calm, her eyes moving between the passengers and the attendants, observing every detail. One of the attendants from first class entered economy to fetch something. As she passed by Elena's row, she recognized her. A slight smirk crossed her face. She leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "That's the woman who thought she was in first class. Imagine her sitting here now. I knew she didn't belong up there." They both chuckled softly, thinking no one had heard. But Elena's ears were sharp. She heard every word. Still, she kept her peace, only folding her scarf neatly on her lap. The elderly woman beside her, though half asleep, also caught the tone of their voices. She turned to Elena and said quietly, "It's not right, the way they treat you. Anyone can see you have grace and dignity. They don't know who you really are." Elena patted her hand gently and replied, "It's not important that they know. What matters is how we choose to behave, even when others misjudge us." Her words were calm, but her eyes carried a quiet strength that seemed unshakable. Hours passed. The plane glided smoothly through the night sky. The cabin lights dimmed, leaving only a soft glow above the aisles. Many passengers fell asleep, their heads resting awkwardly against the small pillows. Elena remained awake, looking out of the window. The stars outside sparkled brightly against the darkness, endless and beautiful. She thought about how life was similar to this flight, people separated by curtains, some living in comfort, others struggling, but all traveling toward the same destination. Suddenly, turbulence shook the plane. Passengers stirred, some gasping softly as the aircraft rattled. The attendants rushed down the aisles, instructing everyone to fasten their seat belts. Elena calmly adjusted hers and helped the old woman secure hers properly. The plane rocked again, harder this time, and a few people screamed. Children cried, and anxious whispers filled the cabin. In first class, passengers demanded reassurance, their voices rising above the noise. The attendants hurried to calm them, speaking loudly with practiced smiles. In economy, however, the attendants moved quickly but without patience, simply repeating instructions and moving on. The turbulence passed after a few minutes, but the fear it left behind lingered. The elderly woman beside Elena clutched her chest, breathing heavily. Elena turned to her with concern, asking softly, "Are you all right?" The woman shook her head weakly, whispering, "I feel dizzy." Elena raised her hand to call an attendant, but when one arrived, she spoke hurriedly, "She'll be fine, maybe just nerves." Then she left before Elena could say more. Elena frowned slightly, then turned back to the woman. "Don't worry," she said calmly. "I'm here with you. Breathe slowly. You're safe. She guided the woman through slow breaths, placing a steady hand on hers. Gradually, the woman's breathing eased. Elena reached for her own handbag, pulling out a small piece of candy wrapped in paper. She handed it to the woman, saying, "This will help with your blood sugar. Take it slowly." The woman accepted gratefully, and her color began to return. Passengers nearby noticed how Elena had taken control when the attendant did not. Some of them nodded in respect, realizing this quiet woman had more presence than they had thought. Meanwhile, in first class, laughter had already returned. The turbulence was treated as a momentary inconvenience, quickly forgotten over drinks and desserts. The attendants there continued to smile, unaware of how close one passenger in economy had come to fainting. Elena, however, stayed awake, watching over the elderly woman as though she were family. Her eyes remained calm, her spirit unshaken, even as whispers of doubt and arrogance circled around her. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew her true worth, even if others could not see it yet. The night deepened. The plane sailed steadily across the sky, carrying its hundreds of passengers closer to their destination. Elena leaned back at last, allowing her eyes to close for a moment. She knew the journey was far from over. Events were unfolding slowly, but soon the truth about who she really was would rise like the morning sun, and those who had judged her by her appearance would be forced to face their mistake. The airplane moved steadily across the dark sky, its engines humming like a deep lullaby. Many passengers in economy had drifted into uneasy sleep, their heads resting against small pillows or tilted uncomfortably to one side. The elderly woman beside Elena had managed to relax after the turbulence, though her breathing was still a little heavy. Elena sat quietly, keeping one eye on her while gazing through the small window. Stars shone brightly outside, scattered like diamonds across the endless sky. But inside the cabin, the mood was still tense. People whispered about the sudden shake of the plane, wondering if it would happen again. Some passengers nervously pressed the call buttons, but the attendants who came seemed tired and impatient. They reassured the passengers with short words, then hurried away to other duties. In first class, however, attendants lingered, offering comfort with smiles, even as passengers demanded more wine or fresh blankets. The difference in treatment was as sharp as day and night. Elena noticed everything. Her calm eyes followed the staff as they moved. She listened to the tones of their voices, the way they spoke warmly in first class but quickly and without patience in economy. It was not new to her. She had seen this many times in life, people deciding someone's worth based on clothing, luggage, or appearance. She pressed her hands together on her lap and reminded herself not to be angry. She had chosen to live simply, to walk humbly, even though her true position in the world was far above what these people could imagine. Suddenly, the elderly woman beside her shifted uneasily. Her face grew pale, and she clutched her chest with one hand. Elena leaned toward her instantly. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. The woman whispered weakly, "I feel so lightheaded." Her voice trembled, almost fading into silence. Elena's sharp eyes studied her quickly. She saw the signs: shallow breathing, pale lips, and trembling hands. Something was wrong. Elena pressed the call button above her seat. An attendant arrived a few moments later, her expression already showing impatience. "Yes? What seems to be the problem?" she asked briskly. Elena spoke firmly, "This woman is not well. She needs assistance now. Please bring water and check if there is a medical kit on board." The attendant glanced at the elderly woman, then back at Elena. She shrugged lightly and said, "She is probably just nervous. It happens often in economy." Her words were careless, almost dismissive. She turned as if to leave. Elena's voice grew stronger, though still calm. "Do not walk away. Bring water, and inform the crew immediately. This is not just nerves." The firmness in her tone made the attendant hesitate. She frowned, but finally nodded and went off, though clearly annoyed. Elena turned back to the elderly woman, holding her hand tightly. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Breathe slowly. In, and out. You are safe." She placed her other hand gently against the woman's back, rubbing in slow circles, trying to keep her calm. Passengers nearby began to notice. A man sitting across the aisle leaned forward. "Is she all right?" he asked with concern. Elena replied softly, "She will be if we stay calm. Please, can you lift that bag from under her feet so she has more space?" The man quickly obeyed, pulling the bag away. Another passenger offered a small bottle of water, which Elena accepted with a thankful nod. She carefully lifted the woman's head and helped her sip slowly. The color began to return to her cheeks, but her body still trembled. Moments later, the attendant returned with a small kit and a cup of water. She placed them on Elena's tray table with little care and said, "Here. See what you can do. We'll check again later." Then she hurried away, clearly more focused on returning to first class. Some passengers gasped quietly at her cold behavior. Elena, however, did not waste time complaining. She opened the kit quickly, checking its contents. Inside were basic supplies, bandages, gloves, and a small packet of sugar tablets. She removed one and offered it to the elderly woman. "Place this on your tongue. It will help you," she said kindly. The woman obeyed, and slowly her trembling eased. Her breathing grew steadier, and she managed to lean back against the seat with relief. "Thank you, my dear," she whispered weakly. Elena smiled warmly. "You are strong. Just rest now. I will not leave your side." Her calm presence filled the space like a soft light, easing the fears of those sitting nearby. A young boy across the aisle whispered to his mother, "She talks like a doctor." The mother nodded softly, her eyes filled with respect. As the minutes passed, the elderly woman's strength returned little by little. Elena continued to watch her closely, never letting go of her hand. The passengers around them sat quietly, their eyes filled with admiration. They had seen how Elena had acted quickly, with more care and knowledge than the attendants themselves. Some began to wonder who she really was. She looked so simple, yet her confidence and authority felt unusual, almost powerful. Meanwhile, in first class, the laughter and comfort continued. Passengers enjoyed fine meals and reclined their seats into beds. Attendants poured wine and spoke with polished politeness, unaware of the drama unfolding in economy. But the whispers in the back of the plane were growing. People began to tell one another, "That woman saved the old lady. She knew exactly what to do." Others added, "The staff didn't care, but she acted like she was in charge." Bit by bit, respect for Elena spread through the cabin. After some time, the turbulence returned. The plane shook violently, causing passengers to grip their armrests in fear. Some screamed, children cried loudly, and the crew shouted for everyone to remain seated with belts fastened. The elderly woman beside Elena whimpered softly, but Elena placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Stay calm. You are safe," she whispered. Her voice was so firm and gentle that it calmed not only the woman but also the passengers sitting nearby. Elena's calmness was like an anchor in the storm. While attendants ran up and down the aisle, trying to manage the chaos, Elena's voice kept the passengers around her steady. "Breathe slowly. Hold on. This will pass," she said again and again. And indeed, after a few tense minutes, the turbulence eased. The plane returned to smooth flight, though the memory of fear still lingered heavily in the cabin. When it was over, many passengers turned to Elena with gratitude in their eyes. The man across the aisle leaned forward again and said, "Thank you for what you did. You kept everyone calm." Others nodded in agreement. Elena only smiled softly and replied, We all help each other when we can. That is how it should be. She did not boast, nor seek praise. She simply returned her gaze to the stars outside the window, her face serene. Yet the impression she left on those around her was powerful. The passengers began to see her differently. She no longer appeared just as a simple woman in plain clothes. She seemed like someone greater, someone with wisdom, authority, and quiet strength. They wondered why the staff had dismissed her so easily, and why she was seated in economy instead of first class. Something about her did not fit the picture they had assumed. A sense of mystery surrounded her now, one that would only deepen as the flight continued. Elena folded her hands gently in her lap. She felt no anger toward those who had insulted her earlier. Instead, she thought about the lesson life had once again shown her, that arrogance blinds people, while humility allows one to see clearly. Soon, the truth about who she really was would come into light. And when it did, the same staff who had laughed at her would regret their mistake deeply. The long night in the sky finally began to soften into morning. Outside the window, Elena watched the horizon change its colors. At first, it was a dark blue, then faint streaks of pink and orange began to spread across the edge of the world. The rising sun made the clouds glow like mountains of fire, and the light touched the silver wings of the plane with brilliance. Passengers stirred awake, rubbing their eyes and stretching their stiff arms. The elderly woman beside Elena was feeling much better now, thanks to her calm care during the night. She gave Elena a grateful smile and whispered, "You were like an angel when I needed one most." Elena returned the smile gently, patting the woman's hand. The crew began preparing for landing. In first class, attendants served warm towels and fresh juice. Their voices were sweet, and their movements careful, as though every detail was part of a performance. In economy, however, the staff moved more quickly. They collected trays and reminded passengers to fasten seat belts, their voices flat and rushed. Elena noticed the difference again, but she remained silent. She had seen enough to understand what needed to be changed. This experience was not just a flight for her, it was a lesson, a chance to see the truth hidden behind polished advertisements and smiling posters. As the plane lowered toward the city below, the seat belt signs glowed. Passengers peered out of their windows to see tall buildings shining under the morning sun. The plane shook lightly as the wheels touched the runway, then rolled smoothly along the ground until it slowed to a stop. Many passengers sighed in relief, some clapping softly in celebration of a safe landing. Elena smiled quietly, knowing the journey was not truly over yet. Something important was about to happen, something that would change how everyone remembered this flight. The doors opened, and passengers began to gather their belongings. In first class, attendants bowed politely, thanking each traveler with respectful words. In economy, the staff repeated the same lines but without warmth. Elena helped the elderly woman lift her bag once again, making sure she had everything. Together they moved slowly toward the front. As they walked past the first-class cabin, Elena noticed the same attendant who had dismissed her at the counter. The attendant stood tall, offering bright smiles to the wealthy passengers, but her eyes dimmed slightly when they fell on Elena. There was still disbelief there, mixed with quiet annoyance. Passengers began to exit the plane, walking down the jet bridge into the large, bright terminal. The air inside was cool and filled with voices. Families reunited, businessmen hurried toward waiting cars, and children ran to their grandparents. Elena stepped out calmly, still walking with the elderly woman by her side. But just ahead, a group of airline officials stood in a neat row, waiting. They wore formal suits, their badges shining, and their expressions were full of respect. At the center of the group stood the airline CEO himself, a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence. The moment his eyes fell on Elena, his face broke into a warm smile. He stepped forward quickly, stretching out his hand. "Madam Owner," he said with deep respect, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "Welcome back. It is an honor to have you with us again." The words fell like thunder into the quiet around them. Passengers nearby froze in shock. The attendants who had mistreated Elena turned pale instantly, their eyes wide with disbelief. Even the passengers from first class stopped in their tracks, staring at the scene unfolding before them. No one had expected this. Elena returned the CEO's greeting with a graceful nod. She did not show pride or arrogance. She simply said, "Thank you. It was an important flight for me. I saw many things I needed to see." Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight, as if they held meaning beyond the simple moment. The CEO lowered his head slightly, understanding at once what she meant. The staff standing behind him shifted uncomfortably, already realizing the gravity of their mistake. The whispers began immediately. Passengers murmured to each other, "Did you hear that? She owns the airline." Another gasped, "The same woman they sent to economy. She's the owner." A first-class passenger who had earlier scoffed at Elena's plain appearance now looked down at the floor, his face burning with embarrassment. The two young men who had laughed at her handbag exchanged nervous glances, wishing they could disappear. Respect began to replace arrogance in the eyes of those who had mocked her. The staff who had denied her at the counter felt their knees weaken. Their confident smiles were gone, replaced with expressions of fear and regret. The attendant who had smirked at her in economy now looked as if she wanted to vanish into the crowd. She whispered softly to her colleague, "We made the biggest mistake of our lives." Her colleague could only nod, his face pale. The CEO turned to them sharply. "Is this how our passengers are treated?" he demanded. His voice was firm, though he did not shout. The staff bowed their heads, unable to answer. Elena raised her hand gently. "Do not be harsh with them now," she said softly. "There will be time to correct mistakes. For now, let this be a lesson for them and for everyone." Her words showed mercy, but also authority. Everyone listening could feel the strength behind her calm tone. The elderly woman beside Elena looked at her in awe. You're the owner?" she asked in a trembling voice. Elena smiled warmly and replied, "Yes, but that does not make me greater than you. We are all travelers on the same journey." She then guided the woman gently toward the waiting lounge, showing the same kindness she had shown from the beginning. It was this humility that touched people even more than her power. Cameras flashed as news reporters, alerted by the CEO's presence, began to gather. They snapped photos of Elena, the simple woman who had been underestimated by her own staff. Within minutes, the story spread across phones and social media. Passengers shared what they had witnessed, telling friends and family about the owner of the airline who had been sent to economy because she looked too ordinary. Their stories always carried the same message: appearances deceive, and true greatness hides in simplicity. The attendants who had mocked her now stood frozen, their eyes lowered in shame. They remembered their whispered jokes, their careless words, and their dismissive actions. Each memory burned like fire. The regret was instant and deep. They wished they could go back and undo what they had done, but it was too late. The truth was out. The woman they had looked down on was the very person who signed their salaries, who controlled the future of the airline itself. Their arrogance had cost them their dignity in front of the world. Elena walked forward, surrounded by respect. But she did not let pride enter her heart. She paused once more, turning back to the passengers who had traveled with her. Her voice was gentle but clear when she said, "Remember this journey. Do not measure people by their clothes or their luggage. Measure them by their actions, by their kindness, and by the way they treat others." The passengers nodded, many with tears in their eyes. They knew they had witnessed something rare, something they would never forget. The CEO escorted Elena toward a waiting car outside the terminal. Yet even as she walked with him, she remained simple in her manner, smiling kindly at the cleaners, the porters, and the drivers. Unlike the staff who had judged her, She treated every person she passed with equal respect. And that, more than her title, was what left the deepest mark on all who saw her that day. The terminal was filled with murmurs long after Elena stepped off the plane. Many passengers still could not believe what they had witnessed. The woman who had quietly sat in economy, dressed in simple clothes, was in fact the owner of the entire airline. The scene replayed in their minds again and again, the CEO greeting her with deep respect, the staff bowing their heads in shame, and Elena walking with grace, as if nothing had happened. For the passengers, this was not just the end of a journey, it was the beginning of a story they would tell others for years to come. Elena did not rush to leave. Instead, she walked slowly through the terminal with the elderly woman she had helped during the flight. The woman's steps were shaky, but Elena supported her gently, making sure she was comfortable. Reporters tried to push closer, their cameras flashing, but the CEO's team held them back. Still, some words escaped into microphones: owner of airline, denied first-class seat, treated unfairly. News channels were already preparing their headlines. The incident was going to be shared far and wide. The staff who had misjudged Elena followed at a distance. Their faces showed fear and regret. They remembered their laughter at the counter, their whispered jokes during the flight, and their careless responses when Elena had called for help. Now those same actions felt like heavy stones pressing on their hearts. They wished they could disappear into the crowd, but they knew they had to face the truth. One attendant whispered to another, "We ruined everything. How could we not see who she was?" The other replied in a trembling voice, "Not just who she was, we failed to see her as a human being." The words cut deep. The CEO led Elena to a private lounge, where senior staff had already gathered. The room was quiet, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of nervous shuffling. When Elena entered, everyone stood up instantly, their eyes full of respect. She nodded politely and asked them all to sit. Then she spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I have traveled many times on this airline. I created it with the dream that every passenger would feel valued, no matter who they are or where they sit. But today I saw something that troubled me deeply." Her words hung in the air like heavy clouds. The staff listened in silence. Some lowered their eyes, unable to meet her gaze. Elena continued, "I was denied the seat I had paid for, not because of a mistake in the system, but because of a mistake in judgment. I was told I did not belong in first class. I was looked down on because of my simple clothes, my small handbag, and my quiet manner. This was not just a mistake against me, it was a mistake against the values this airline was built upon." Her voice was gentle, but each sentence struck like a hammer. The CEO bowed his head. "Madam, I take full responsibility. We failed you, and we failed our passengers. Please forgive us." His voice was heavy with sincerity. Elena turned to the attendants who had been directly involved. Their faces were pale, their hands trembling. They stood up slowly and spoke together, "We are sorry. We were blind. We judged you by your appearance, and we mocked you when we should have served you with respect. Please forgive us." Their voices cracked with emotion, and their eyes glistened with unshed tears. Elena studied them for a moment. She could see their fear, but also their sincerity. She did not wish to destroy their lives, for she believed everyone deserved the chance to learn. She spoke softly, "I will not fire you. Instead, I will give you the chance to change. But remember this moment for the rest of your lives. Let it teach you to see every passenger as equal, no matter how they look. True service is not given to the rich alone, it is given to all." Relief washed over their faces, mixed with the weight of responsibility. They nodded quickly, promising themselves they would never forget. Elena then turned to the senior management team. "From today," she said firmly, "new training will be introduced. Every member of this airline must learn the true meaning of respect. I want to see kindness, humility, and dignity shown to every traveler. Let there be no first-class attitude and economy-class indifference. Every passenger is important. Every life matters. The managers nodded, already taking notes. They knew these were not just words, this was a new policy that would reshape the company. Outside the lounge, passengers who had witnessed the incident gathered in small groups, still discussing what they had seen. Many felt ashamed of their own behavior. Some had mocked Elena quietly when she walked past, believing she did not belong. Others had stayed silent when the staff mistreated her, afraid to speak up. Now they realized their mistake. A man who had laughed earlier confessed to his friend, "I was wrong. She had more dignity in her silence than I have ever seen in wealth." His friend agreed, "Yes, she showed us what true class really means." The elderly woman who had been helped by Elena sat in the lounge as well, watching everything with teary eyes. She finally spoke up, her voice trembling but strong. "This woman saved me when I was weak. She held my hand, she calmed me, she treated me with more care than any staff did. I didn't know she was the owner, but I knew she was special. Now I see that her greatness is not in owning an airline, but in the kindness of her heart." Her words touched everyone deeply. Even the CEO wiped his eyes quietly. When it was time for Elena to leave, she rose gracefully. The staff bowed as she walked out, but she stopped and turned back once more. Her final words were soft, yet they echoed in every corner of the room: "Never forget, wealth is not shown by clothes, and power is not proven by loud voices. True greatness is shown in humility, in kindness, and in respect. If you learn this, you will not only serve passengers better, you will also become better human beings." Then she walked out, leaving the staff in silence, their hearts heavy with lessons. Outside, the sun had risen fully, casting golden light across the terminal. Reporters tried once more to capture her picture, but Elena kept walking with calm steps. She did not crave fame. She did not need headlines to prove her worth. She simply wished that her experience would open eyes and change hearts. The elderly woman beside her leaned close and whispered, "You have changed my life today." Elena smiled gently and replied, "And you have reminded me why kindness is the greatest wealth of all." The news of the incident spread quickly across the world. Headlines appeared online: "Airline owner denied first-class seat, staff left in shock, and simple woman teaches airline lesson in respect." Social media filled with comments from people praising her humility and condemning the arrogance of the staff. Some called her the owner with a heart, while others wrote, "This is how real leaders act." The story became more than just an airline mistake, it became a lesson for society itself. Back at the airport, the staff who had once mocked Elena stood together in silence. Their hearts were heavy, but they also felt grateful. She had given them a chance to change. They promised each other that from that day forward, they would treat every passenger with the dignity they deserved. They would never again let appearances blind them. The memory of their mistake would live with them, but so would the chance for redemption. Elena finally stepped into her waiting car. As it drove away from the airport, she looked out of the window at the sky above. A small smile curved her lips. She thought of the passengers, the staff, and the lessons of the journey. She knew that what had happened would not be forgotten. It would grow into a story told in airports, in homes, in offices, and in schools, a story about a simple woman who revealed her greatness not through wealth, but through kindness and humility. And that was the legacy she wanted to leave behind.